Hey everybody, it is Professor Parish, and we are on Module 2 of English 109. So I hope you all had a good week, good first week of class, getting everything organized. I'm on our homepage right now, and so I wanted to go ahead and tell you all before we start, I had a student ask if I could open up Modules 3 and 4 ahead of time. So I have. You'll see that they are open now. I won't have the lecture videos for these modules on here until next week and the week after next, because I usually post them Saturday or Sunday before the class starts for the week. So if you start working ahead and you get to these weeks and you have any questions about the assignments, please email me and let me know, because I'm happy to answer emails, but I just probably won't have a lecture video posted until we get closer to time. All right. But with that being said, if you've not completed the discussion forum for this first week, it is due tonight. Make sure you have those and your responses posted. But let's go ahead and talk about Module 2. So I want to go ahead and go over Chapters 1 and Chapter 2 briefly with you all before we get any further. You'll notice that the assignments for this week are Chapters 3 and 4, which is pages 48 through 107. Now, that seems like a lot. That seems like a lot of reading for 1 week. But as you all will probably notice looking through this textbook, a lot of the reading are mainly just examples or assignments. They're not actually close reading that you have to do. So don't let that page number freak you out. Once you actually get into the chapters, I think you'll notice that there's not nearly as much close reading as you need to do. I'm mainly concerned that you read the main points, and if there's any terminology that's in bold, that you give that a look, because when we do our midterm exam and our final exam, I'm going to derive from that. So that way you can make notes, you can bookmark in your textbook, you can take notes as you go if there's any term in bold that you need to take note of. So looking over chapters 1 and 2, before I go any further, let's talk about chapters 1 and 2 in our book. And so chapter 1 is really just an intro to writing. It's just an intro to writing in general, knowing the difference between writing and talking and what you need to spell out for your audience that talking obviously doesn't do. Because when you talk to somebody, usually it's very brief, like you're like, hey, how's it going? What's up? And it's all very short, choppy sentences, right? In writing, you typically have to elaborate more and give your audience more context. And so you need to have points and support. Your writing has to have a point or a purpose, and it has to have supporting statements that kind of back that point up and prove it, right? And so our textbook on pages 4 through 6 give you examples of here's my point, and then here are the reasons that back it up and prove it. And then when you diagram a paragraph, which is something we did in college, on page 7, you'll see that in college we did this a lot. You would diagram a paragraph. So you would start out, you'd label your topic sentence, you'd find your supporting evidence and your conclusion. And every big paragraph in a paper, maybe not every paragraph itself, but every big paragraph in an essay needs to have that topic, that conclusion, something that connects it to the next point, right? So when one paragraph ends, you need a way to tie to the next paragraph and make it all flow, make it all thread together, correct? So then the textbook talks about how purpose works. So purpose, there are 3 common purposes in writing, and that's on page 8. You have to inform your audience, to teach them something, to persuade them, to make them change their opinions to whatever your opinion is, or to entertain them, to give them some amusement, comedy, whatever. So you either are informing, persuading, or entertaining. That is the 3 purposes of writing. And there's lots of different subsects of that. There's lots of different little mini genres within that, but typically your writing does one of 3 things. It could even do all 3. It could inform people, persuade them, and entertain them if you're going for the trifecta, right? So, but it does have a point. Your writing has a purpose. And I think that's really important because a lot of students are like, well, why am I writing this? And I'm like, well, if you think about it, you're doing it for one of 3 reasons, right? And so you just have to determine which of the 3 reasons are you doing it for and how can you do that most effectively, right? I would say entertaining is the most difficult one because we all have different senses of humor. So finding a way to entertain us, it's the most subjective because some people, things that I find funny, other people may be like, I don't get it, and they don't find funny. So I'd say entertaining is the most difficult problem to do, right? The most difficult type of writing. So then page 9 talks about considering purpose within different contexts and talking about the different kinds of writing that we'll do in this class. We're not going to do every single one, but it does talk about contrast, argument, and cause and effect, and compare and contrasting, which we will do. So it goes on to talk about, chapter 1 talks about audience. Your audience is really important because whatever your audience is, that's how you write to them. So for example, my family raises cattle and I show cattle. So when I talk to people about show cattle, if I talk to somebody that shows cattle with me, we have our own lingo and our own stuff that we talk about. I'm like, oh, did you get the chute? Did you do this? How'd you do the tailhead? Did you do all that? To us that know that lingo, it's just a common thing. Like, we don't have to explain anything. We know what it means. But somebody that's never shown a cow before in their life are like, tailhead, what are you talking about? Like, it's like a foreign language to them. They won't know what's going on. So I would have to explain it in more detail to an audience that's not familiar with what I'm talking about. And the same thing goes with other things. I have no clue about baseball. I've never watched a baseball game in my life. So if somebody was trying to tell me about baseball, I'd have no clue. Whereas two baseball players could probably talk to each other about like RBI and stuff. And I'd be like, what's that? And they're like, oh, it's this. And you guys know what's going on, but I would have no clue. So that's kind of the importance of understanding your audience. Knowing who your audience is will allow you to know how much you need to explain about a certain topic, right? So for example, a lot of you in this class this semester are high school students. I have not been a high school student for a long time. So things that you all think are relevant and that you know about, I will not know. So that's kind of the context of it, right? And there's some people in our class that are older that will probably be in the same boat as I am, right? So on page 11, they talk about evaluating the nature of your audience. And they give you some like bullet points, some numbers here of what you should do. Like, how much does your audience already know about the subject you're talking about? What might the reader need to know? Is the purpose simply to inform them, or are you trying to persuade them as well? And what type of language should you use? So if you're writing a paper for a kindergarten class, the language you use is going to be a lot different than writing a college paper class, right? So your audience is very key in your writing. It's kind of the unspoken factor. Like, a lot of people don't think about audience, but it's one of the most important aspects about your paper, and it kind of dictates what you're going to do in your paper in terms of tone and style and content. So speaking about tone, if you go to page 12, it gives us a note about tone. And tone is kind of the attitude of the paper. Like, are you going to be casual? Are you professional? Or if you're trying to persuade someone, you can be more stern perhaps in your writing. It's purpose and audience go hand in hand, and tone kind of helps to give that more depth, right? So you have your purpose, why you're writing, you have your audience, who you're writing to, and then your tone is how you're writing it. So those three things, purpose, audience, and tone, are your three key elements when you're writing a paper. They all kind of go hand in hand together. And so, yeah, I like the idea that our textbook brings up writing as a discovery process. When I was starting out college and when I was in high school, I just wanted to chuck out a draft instantly. I wanted to just sit down, take 5 minutes, start my paper, and then in 2 hours have a draft done. And that was my goal. And for a while it worked, because I'm an English major, so I naturally liked writing. So for a while that worked fine. But after a while, the more college classes I took and the more complex the writing got, I realized that I couldn't just sit down and chuck out a draft in 2 hours. It wasn't going to work. I needed to spend more time outlining and preparing my writing and brainstorming and figuring out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to organize it. And that's kind of what this textbook talks about in chapter 1 is, okay, you have an idea for your paper in mind. Now what do you do with it? And they give several ideas of how you can brainstorm. Some people keep journals. Some people list. Some people cluster. I'm a lister. Like, everything I do is like in a listing format. I have to list in order for things to make sense. So that's, for me, is what works the best. But other people are different. So this textbook and this chapter and chapter 2 are all about you figuring out what works best for you. And then they talk about sending a proper formal email. I feel like email etiquette is a lost art, because so many of the people in the current generation, the youngest generation, it's like a social media thing. Like, you guys don't write emails to people, right? I write emails all the time, so email etiquette is important. But I will say this, if you do email me, just let me know what class you're in, because one, I'm teaching more than one class this semester. So when somebody's like, hey, I've got a question about my paper, I'm like, okay, which class are you in? That will help. And two, make sure that you say like your name, because I know it's on the email, but that always helps. And it helps me to remember who you are and what class you're in. So it's a nice way of connecting that together. Right. And so then chapter 1 finishes up talking about different stages of the writing process. So there's pre-writing, where you think about and brainstorm your ideas. there's your first draft that you do, and then, which is kind of the draft you're going to turn in for this class, is technically your first draft. Or we'll do like a peer review forum for some weeks, and that'll be your first draft. And then you'll revise and edit it, and then that'll give you a chance to get a better grade. So that's kind of the writing format that we're doing here. This chapter talks about MLA a little bit, but like I said in our textbook, or in our homepage, I have this citation and source presentation you can always reference if you have any questions about MLA. It's always there. When we really get into the first paper, we'll talk more about MLA in broader detail. All right. And so then chapter 2 itself just talks about techniques in writing. Some people do free writing, where they just start writing and see where it goes. Some people list a series of questions about their topic, and they hope to answer those questions in their paper. Some people make lists. I'm a lister. Some people do clustering, which I have never been a clusterer. My brain just does not work that way, but I know a lot of people that do. And you can see on page 34 what clustering looks like. For some people it works. I'm more like page 35. I like a checklist. I like something I can mark off as I go. And usually outlines kind of look like lists. And for me, that's why outlining works, because that kind of molds with my brain's way of organizing and planning things out. And so pages 36 through 38 kind of talk about like the first draft, and then it gets into revising and what you can do to revising and making sure everything is unified and structured and organized in your paper. It gives ideas and topics about editing. So if you scroll through pages 40 through 42 in chapter 2, you'll kind of get some ideas of what editing and revising looks like. And then it talks on page 43 about peer review, and we will do peer review in this class a couple of times. And as we get closer to that, I'll explain what that looks like. But you can look on page 43 and 44 to see what peer review looks like in our textbook. And then the rest of the chapter is just talking about different activities and things related to the writing process. So the first 2 chapters are I like the way that our book outlines them. They're just getting you used to the concept of writing and organizing your thoughts together for a college setting, which I think is important. And so chapters 3 and 4 are going to expand upon those steps, and we'll talk about them next week. So with that being said, I do want to go over the assignments for this week. The first assignment is our discussion forum. So make sure, I know it says read chapters 1 through 3. If you read chapters 1 and 2, I think that you'll be able to do most of these questions. You may have to read through chapter 3 before answering the third question. So that's why it's listed on there. But mainly for these 3 questions in our discussion forum, I'm wanting your opinions. First of all, have you ever used any brainstorming techniques the textbook discusses, such as listing or clustering? Explain your answer and whether or not you've used these techniques. So I'm curious, how do you organize your thoughts? If you've not used any of the techniques in the book, how do you start a paper? Are you like I was in high school and just sat down for 2 hours and chucked out a draft? If so, comment that in the discussion forum. I'm very curious. I want you all to be honest. And if that's really your strategy, then be honest about it. That's very helpful for me as an instructor to know kind of where everybody at the class is at, like how you all prepare your writing and brainstorm and etc. I will say outlining for me works wonders. So if you're somebody that just sits down and chucks out a draft, you'll be giving it a try this semester, and I think it is really helpful. Question 2, what is the hardest part about writing for you, and why is it difficult? This is a really important question, and for me, the hardest part of writing is getting started. I have literally sat for an hour, and I'm not joking, a full hour before getting the first paragraph of a paper done, because I always want that first paragraph to be perfect. For me as a writer, if I get that first paragraph done, the rest all kind of falls into place. But if that first paragraph isn't exactly like I like it, then I struggle and I feel unfocused. But that's just me. Some people have much different views of writing. So I'm curious for you as a writer, what is the hardest part about a paper for you writing it, and why is it difficult? For me, getting started is the hardest part because I feel like I need that foundation for everything else to fall into place. And if I don't have that, then I question myself and I don't feel focused. So that's my personal prerogative with it, but I'm curious to know what you all think as well. And then finally, and this kind of relates to chapter 3, what is the importance of specific details? Why does a piece of writing need these specifics? And is there any type of writing that perhaps wouldn't need specific details? And explain your answer. So after you read chapter 3, and we'll talk about it next week, I'm curious to know your thoughts as to what what those specific details entail and why they are important. All right. So your answers to these 3 questions and at least 2 responses to your peers are due by Sunday night of this coming week. That's the discussion forum for this week, writing and its complications. So the other assignment is textbook activity number 1. So I want to open this up, and you will need to have read chapter 2 before you get this textbook activity done. So textbook activity 1, I'm going to open this up for y'all. It goes through pages 32 through 33 in our textbook. So if you go back, let me double check and make sure those are right. They are not. I'm going to change that in our book to our textbook activity. Don't pay any attention to the textbook pages. That was the old edition. Don't pay any attention to that activity there. It's actually starts on page 46. So 46 is where that actually starts at. So don't pay any attention to the 32. It's 46. And I'll email you all and tell you all that. Okay. So you all know. But there is a question here of taking a writing inventory, and the questions kind of go below. They may be a little different with a different edition, but essentially answer these questions, and that is the writing assignment. So there's 10 short answer questions, and this one you check which techniques you use, and then this first question you check yes, sometimes, or no. When you start a paper, do you typically do any pre-writing? So you do need to read chapter 2 before you start on this, or have read chapter 2 before you start on it. But yeah, so I'm curious to know your answers to these. You can either copy and paste your answers to these questions and put them in the submission below, or you can upload a file. So let me switch to student view and show you all how to do this if you're curious. I'll switch to student view here. All right, so you have some options here, okay? There's the textbook activity guidelines that you can look up, what we just looked at. You can either choose a submission type. You can do text, upload, or you can do Google assignments or Office 365. So if you do stuff through Google Docs, you can upload through here. If you do stuff through Office 365, you can do that here. You can select a file from your computer, and you can choose, if you choose this, you can select a file from your computer and just upload from there and click open and go from there. Or you can click the text feature and it lets you type out your answers, and then there's a submit button down here below. Okay, so you have 4 different ways you can submit the assignment. So you should be okay. You can either do Google, Office 365, which is like Word Online. You can upload a file, or you can type the answer yourself. So I think that should give you enough options to turn the assignment in. But yeah, that's all you have to do. And then once you click submit, it will submit it. And as long as you do it by Sunday, you'll be fine. It's worth 40 points. So don't forget this assignment. But I'm going to exit student view and go back. All right. So yeah, that is pretty much the assignments for this week for Module 2. Like I said, if y'all have any questions, feel free to let me know. But I am curious. I'll go back and I'll email everybody about the change in the textbook activity, about the page numbers. I'll email you all so you all have access to those, to the right page number in our book. But in other words, if you have questions, just feel free to let me know. And make sure you do the assignments for week 1. Make sure you do that. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week to talk about Module 3 of English 109. Bye.